Welcome to How Manga Took Over the World, presented by LibraryPass and Comics Plus. My name is Guy LeCharles Gonzalez. I'm the Chief Content Officer for LibraryPass and the moderator for today's session. I'm excited to be joined by a panel of distinguished guests to talk about one of the hottest categories in the publishing industry, manga. Debora Aoki is a comics journalist who writes about manga for Publishers Weekly and is one quarter of the weekly podcast Mangasplaining, a show that introduces manga to people who haven't read manga before and is one of my personal favorites. She's also a comics creator, user experience designer, and illustrator based in Oakland, California. Frederick Jones developed a passion for promoting diversity at a young age and spent a decade working in the video game industry. Having worked on nearly every part of product creation, including marketing, development, and brand management, he combined his experience with his lifelong love of anime to create the diverse manga brand Saturday AM in 2013. He resides in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, with his family and dog Allie. Kae Winters grew up in the suburbs of London, where her love of manga inspired her to study Japanese at the University of London before moving to Los Angeles in 2005. She's worked for TOKYOPOP since 2016, overseeing marketing, PR, and event coordination. In her spare time, she plays video games, cooks for friends, and fusses over her cats, Roto and Rosalie. We've received several questions through the registration form, some of which we'll address directly during the session, and we'll leave a little time at the end for any additional questions that may come up. If you're still on Twitter, you can follow all of us at the handles noted here and share your questions, comments, and insights using the hashtag #ReadAllTheComics. Today's webinar is presented by LibraryPass. We curate high-interest, immersive digital content that helps libraries and schools expand their reach and engagement without breaking their materials budget. Our Comics Plus platform offers unlimited simultaneous access to thousands of digital comics, graphic novels, and manga in collections curated for elementary, middle school, and high school readers. We also offer a complete collection, including thousands of additional titles for older readers to public and academic libraries. Learn more and sign up for a free demo account at comicsplusapp.com. For pricing information, school libraries can also contact Mackin, our exclusive K-12 partner in the US and Canada, while public and academic libraries can contact our partners at Brodart or Biblioteca. And now, enjoy the session. All right, so welcome to the program. We've got some people in attendance. We're going to jump in. We've got a great agenda to discuss. So real quick, I've done your official bio. So what I'd like each of you to do, and we'll start with Deb, give a quick 2-minute, what was your first entry point to manga?
Well, this is going to date me quite a bit. I got into manga thanks to a very melodramatic shoujo manga called Candy Candy. It's kind of about an orphan who gets adopted by a rich family. He goes through all kinds of travails. It was something that I discovered when, like in the late 70s, and it was in Japanese. And I got hooked. It's plain and simple. I mean, it was everyone. I know it's not politically correct to say it's like crack, but it was crack. It got me hooked, but good. And since then, I've been, like I think manga became more readily available in English around the early 80s or so, and so it went from a point where I could buy every manga that was available in English, in one trip, to now my house is going to collapse. Like, I still don't read everything, so I think we've come a long way.
Cool. All right, Frederick, tell us about your entry.
Yeah, so I, not too different from Deb. My obsession was more on the anime side. I grew up in the late 70s, 80s, and I was just one of the, I was one of those kids. We all of us are those kids. I was one of those kids where I was always fascinated by the things that were behind what you saw, right? So like at a young age, I wanted to be in the business of entertainment, but I remember just seeing Battle for the Planets and which was Gotcha Man, and Star Blazers, and just thinking to myself, man, this is so different than like Hanna-Barbera, and I loved Hanna-Barbera, and I loved those shows, the stuff that Alex Toth designed and the stuff that Jack Kirby did, like Thundor the Barbarian. But whenever I would see anime, I couldn't name it. I just knew it was different, and that led me to then I would notice it like in hobby stores where they would have the model kits for like Space Battleship Yamato and Gundam. And then I remember it was an Animag cover, which was an early English language magazine that had they had Gundam, Zeta Gundam on the cover. And so that just, and it, it explained it. I remember renting This Is Manga, the Fred Schott seminal book from the library, because we didn't have the internet, of course. So I was so driven to find out what it was. So it's been an obsession of mine since the late 70s, when I first recognized just that it was different and trying to understand what it was. And then it led me to travel to Japan as exchange student. So I've been a long just lover of the industry. There were other touch points, but one thing I'll say that obviously come up later was that I also began recognizing when I saw Americans who would emulate it, and started to realize just that there was this sense that I wasn't the only one, that other people saw this and were trying to bring it to the West. So people like Ben Dunn, who created obviously Ninja High School, Reggie Byers, who was one of the first African-Americans who did some early Robotech stuff for Kamiko, and then eventually this comic called Shuriken. So I've been entranced by so many pieces of it, but it was just the fact that I recognized in anime just how different it was from traditional Western comics and cartoons.
Cool. All right. Okay.
Yeah, so growing up in the UK, we didn't actually, we got kind of the leftovers from what had been produced in the United States in English. So we'd all seen the same like 6 anime. we all had the exact same little experience. And I remember this was when in the 90s, when Toonami became a thing on Cartoon Network, and my boyfriend at the time was really into Dragon Ball Z, and I remember sitting and watching it with him and being like, nothing's happened for 6 episodes. They're just staring at each other. What's going on? And then they would say something, and I'd be like, I feel like that's not what they said in the original, though. And driven by this weird spite, I started learning Japanese just so I could figure out what the like real dialogue was. And at some point it stopped being spite and I started really enjoying it, and I collected all of Dragon Ball, and I still have a soft spot for it, and started picking up all kinds of manga and really just falling in love with it as a medium. Eventually I did move to Germany, and I do remember seeing TOKYOPOP on all of the shelves in the bookstore in Germany and thinking, wow, that's so cool. It must be really cool to work at a place like that. And then 2016, I ended up joining it myself, which has been just really awesome. Yeah.
Cool. So I guess I'm closest to Frederick, but also completely far away from all of you. Battle of the Planets was like the first introduction. I had no idea what anime was, had never heard of manga, but I remember Battle of the Planets, was really into it. But I grew up a Marvel DC kid, and I didn't really engage with manga until TOKYOPOP's kind of boom in the mid-aughts, and actually still have 12 Days.
Yeah, look at that. I love that one.
That was the first manga I ever read, which I think
Wow.
most people would not consider a normal entry point to manga. I'm not even sure, and we'll get into this, if it's considered manga or manga or manga inspired. And really, it's been the past 2 years working with Comics Plus that I really started getting, trying to discover my own pathway into manga. And I'm still kind of in the early stages. And, like I mentioned before we started, Mangasplaining has kind of really done a job on my wallet and introducing me to things that are expanding my bookshelves. So one of the things we've heard a lot about from libraries is there's a lot of interest in manga. Kids are in particular really demanding certain series, some of the more popular ones. But first, let's define what is manga literally? What is the definition of manga? And I'll ask Deb to take that one first.
Ooh, that's a loaded question, isn't it? Well, manga is basically just means comics, actually, in Japanese. And you'll find it, like if you go to a Japanese bookstore, it'll have the heading will say komiku. So manga can, in Japanese, manga means all kinds of comics. It's not just manga, comics made in Japan or made in a certain side. In fact, I would argue there is a manga influence in a lot of comics. I mean, whether it says or not, but that whenever people say like, oh, there's a manga style, it's like, that's like saying there's a movie style, you know? It's a genre. I mean, it's not, it's a medium, not a genre. There are
Right.
all kinds of ways of drawing manga and manga storytelling. There's some things that are very unique to manga, like the black and white and the read from right to left, and the way that the storytelling can be very decompressed, meaning like sometimes you'll have like these double page spreads and you have this dynamic action. And the way that manga is published in Japanese is a lot of times it's in weekly or monthly magazines. So they're very good at the cliffhanger. And that's one thing that makes manga really appealing to people, is that, you know, they get you in there with the characters and the story, and then you're hooked. You know, you want to keep reading because the survival of these stories depend on reader feedback, right? Like reader cards, like if they fall down in the rankings, they get canceled. And so that's the thing with manga. It's like manga has a great formula, great look. Everyone who looks at it will say, yes, this looks definitely different than American comics, look definitely different than French BD. But I guess one thing I wanted to maybe bring up in this conversation is that our world is melding, in that like there's a lot of American comic artists. Like I think Jim Lee, for example, is very influenced by manga. A whole bunch of the Image Comics guys were influenced by Battle Angel Alita, for example. You see like French artists with, there's a guy named, who does a comic called Radiant from France. Beautiful manga style artwork and storytelling, but he brings a certain French sensibility to it. So I think when I say manga, I like, I guess for my purposes as a manga journalist, I usually use that to refer to comics from Japan, originally published in Japan for a Japanese audience. But that's an artificial distinction, you know. Like I'm reading a lot of webtoons nowadays, like a lot of Korean comics. And if I didn't, no one told me it was from Korea, I would say, oh yeah, it's enjoyable, you know. it's like manga, like you can kind of tell, but like you can go to a sushi bar that has Korean chef, you go like kind of different, but still sushi. But you know, those are all, I guess what I'm saying is that there's things about manga that make it unique and compelling. And it's useful sometimes to say, this is manga, this is a genre, this is a style of comics. But I think this definition is getting very much looser every day. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, Kae, I want to turn to you. And TOKYOPOP has kind of a unique position in American manga comics, you know, not literally manga by Americans, but an American publisher, kind of at the forefront of the first big wave of manga when it was really blowing up. And then here you are again in this second resurgence. Can you talk a little bit about those early days of TOKYOPOP when there were, I think it was original English manga was the term that was being used, or Amerimanga sometimes, versus the licensing of originally published in Japanese translated to English content? What's TOKYOPOP's history with those two things, and how does that look today?
Yeah, it's kind of a really fascinating sort of growth through the industry. I wanted to comment on something that Deb just said that made me laugh, because last time I was in Japan, whenever I spoke to someone and they said, "What do you do?" and I said, "Oh, I work for a North American manga publisher," and every single response for a Japanese person was, "Oh, like Spider-Man?" That when they heard the word manga, they thought Spider-Man, they thought Marvel, DC, you know. So I thought that was fascinating. But to answer your question, yeah, when TOKYOPOP first started, you know, manga was still very unknown, you know, in the US among a lot of English speakers. You know, it was still a very new concept. And I know, you know, one of our earliest titles that we did, Sailor Moon, there was the question of, are people going to be scared away by reading a book right to left, you know, because this is backwards, or, you know, are they going to understand these cultural touchstones that don't need explanation in Japanese, but that are so very foreign to a lot of people who weren't exposed to that culture. And there was a lot of, I mean, back then we decided that we were going to flip the books so that they would read left to right, literally mirroring the images, which of course created a whole new set of problems. You know, right-handed characters are now left-handed, signs are now backwards. You know, it solved for one problem and created new ones. And eventually, though, obviously people have become far more comfortable with Japanese culture. It's sort of permeated a lot more people's knowledge. And now we don't have those same issues of are people going to understand this? You know, there's such a hardcore, passionate fan base for manga and anime. I mean, I still remember, I mean, I grew up in the 90s, and I remember back then it was kind of like this very niche culture. You had to know a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who could get you 20th generation fan subbed VHS tape, you know, so that you could watch Dragon Half or something. And now now it's like you go to Barnes and Noble and there's just like walls and walls and walls of titles to choose from, which is it's fantastic. It's amazing to see how much it's grown. And you know, we back in the day, we very much put out like a lot of titles. Like, you know, every week we had so many titles coming out. Now we're a little bit more boutique. We're kind of selecting very specific titles. One thing that we've been pushing very hard is queer representation and diversity in romance stories. That's like a very important thing for us. So we're kind of like digging through to try and find the titles that we feel speak to us, that we think is going to serve a less represented part of the manga reading audience.
Oh, all right.
Apologize for my cat. He has opinions.
No apologies necessary for pets. So, Frederick, what was happening in 2013 that you were like, because my sense of 2013 is we're between the two big manga waves. What you're on mute. What was happening in 2013 that you were like, hey, I'm going to start a manga publisher?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's very much, well, look, so it's always interesting. These conversations are always interesting because obviously being African-American, there's an undercurrent to the conversation that doesn't get touched on, frankly enough, right? A lot of the growth that manga has is due to people who are Black and brown. So I think that I appreciate us finally getting a chance to embrace this more, because I've been talking about this for 9 years and screaming to everybody about, like, look, please cover the story more, because I think you're missing something that has significant concerns in the future, I think. I mean, the short story, frankly, at the end of the day, is that, you know, what I saw was that as an executive in the video game industry, and I was involved in the launch of PlayStation and a lot of big titles. You know, I was on the marketing side and various things like that. I wasn't a developer. But typically when I would go on a lot of meetings, of course, as you can imagine, I'd be the only person of color in the room, you know, American. It would be, you know, if we're working with Japanese companies, obviously it'd be Japanese, but that would be it. And it was interesting to be a part of an industry that was exploding like that. I remember my first E3, for example, and there were very few people of color there, certainly not Black. If they were Black, they were basically putting up the booths. And if they were female, just to put it in context, they were half naked modeling for these video games. And that was in the, you know, late 90s. So to see, you know, that, you know, to be a part of the industry as for as long as I was, and to see the development of it, where you had more women who were in executive positions, thankfully and rightfully, women who are becoming great producers like Jade Raymond and so on and so forth, to see more people of color who are becoming more involved in the industry like Gordon Bellamy and so forth. You know, industries change. And I think in the case of manga, what had concerned me was that because I had been a fan of it for so long, I was concerned about two big things in that time period you're talking about, and that's what really led me to it. The first was that I had remembered as a kid manga and anime being far more diverse than it was in the 90s. I mean, Robotech had this famous, Macross had this famous interracial love story with a Black female character who was a very prominent character in love with like the hotshot white character, and there was no, you know, it was treated like a normal thing. And that's just something that frankly you just don't very rarely see today in manga. And that bothered me because it seemed like we were moving away from the world don't become, as Deb said, the world don't become flatter. And yet somehow we were moving away from that. Representation was becoming less. I see plenty of white characters among, I see very few South Asian, Black, Latino, so on and so forth. So that was a problem. The other part was that because it was coming so big, especially after the aughts, where remember, in the early parts of the 2000s, social media had not developed as it was. So what we were saying were the really beginning pieces of it. So what you're beginning to see, you're going to see online communities who are really starting to form around manga, whether it was people streaming it illegally on YouTube. I remember watching all of Naruto on YouTube before Shippuden. So before all these things, you were having these communities starting to form, and a lot of Black and brown kids were starting to advocate, and really appreciate seeing other people like them. But then, someone who grew up in the 70s and 80s, it was very familiar where these kids were. It was the old Star Wars problem. You want to be Han Solo and you're the Black kid there, but it's like, no, you be Chewbacca or you be Lando. The white kids get to be Han Solo. You can't be that guy. It was more of that. And I had a nephew, and that just really crystallized, right? A nephew who seemed to be, he was in the same spiral. And I kept thinking, like, wait a minute, like he's a big, he loves this stuff, and yet it doesn't feature him. And his mother was concerned about it. It was like, well, why are you championing this industry that doesn't feature him? Why is he championing this and doesn't feature him? And so I just saw this tremendous opportunity between young Black kids who were creating great content, who needed to be represented, who needed to have their voice heard, who were not getting a chance to do so. And then likewise seeing an industry that just really had just not taken that step of evolution to involve the diversity that was clearly, powering it, but it weren't really involved in a lot of ways. When I would go to these meetings, these companies, again, I would be the only Black person in the room. So things have changed. I don't think they've changed enough, to be frank, but they've changed. And so I think what Saturday has tried to do is to shine a light on the incredible diversity of manga. By the way, nothing new. Everyone on this panel knows the diversity is there. It's just, it's never really been given the sort of credibility and legitimacy it deserves. I do want to say one thing. I know I've gone on for a minute. I do want to say one thing, because I think what Deb offered was really important, and that is that, so I think also manga has become disintermediated from the actual term. I don't think it now means anything. And what I say by that is, look, as a Black man, this is to me, this has been so obvious for so long. I'm always stunned that people don't discuss this more. Manga is just like hip hop. It is literally like hip hop. There's literally no difference. If you grew up when I grew up, it is literally like hip hop, meaning, what does it mean? It's something that got started by a certain group of people that has certain cultural relevancy to it, but you can't prevent other people from enjoying it. So what Saturday AM knew, and I know Viz knows, I know TOKYOPOP knows, I know people know this, but no one really champions it the way that Saturday AM is done, which is that these kids creating manga. You go to Rwanda, you go to Romania, you go to Costa Rica, and you ask them what they're creating. Go look on Instagram. They're creating manga. They don't care what someone says about what they're creating. And the kicker being is, the older we get, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, they're making a career at it in their country. Tony Valenti, by the way, who you're talking about, who created Radiant. No one's going to tell Tony Valenti he's not making manga. Like, Tony, care less. He's made a career off it. He's famous. So I think that there is this notion, I do see this argument building up about people trying to gatekeep manga. And it's like, what are you gatekeeping exactly? It's comic books at its basic level. And beyond that, it is a certain stylistic choice. It's a visual narrative that more can prevent Bollywood from copying Hollywood than you can from Japanese and Koreans copying R&B and hip hop music. It is what it is. And what we're looking at is the evolution of it, not trying to worry about what box it is in, because it's a useless argument.
Well, I think what's happening now is that it's been several years of this. I think the first wave of original manga was people who are quite new, right? And very unseasoned as storytellers, as artists. Whereas I think now you're seeing the people who are making manga all over the world they're creating at a much higher level. And I think one of the challenges is that when you put out work and you say it's manga, you are basically putting yourself against the very best that Japan has to offer, like the superstars, because that's what comes here. What comes to us in English is the tippy tip top of the iceberg of what's made in Japan. So that's what's hard, right? Is that so readers, I think, I think what I've noticed is that readers don't necessarily care where it came from as long as they love it, right? As long as
No,
Yeah.
100%.
good story, good art, you know.
You're
And so
100% correct. You're 100% correct. And to just to piggyback on that, number one, let's start with the first part of that. The reason those kids want to compete is because it's like asking a kid from Lithuania, do you want to play in the NBA? Like, yes, they want to compete at the highest level. They want their books sitting next to Attack on Titan, My Hero Academia. They're not trying to go into the ghetto of graphic novel young adult. They want to be, and that's no offense to that, but it's like they're not trying to be amongst a lot of stuff. They're creating manga, they're following a lot of the elements of it, and they want it to be competing with the best of the best. And in some cases, right, again, Tony Valenti is not Japanese, so in some case, in white manga of our artists, Apple Black is doing very well. So, like, it's that's the nature of the beast, and capitalism will determine if they deserve to be, if they deserve to compete or not. But I think that a lot of these kids who have earned this popularity, they want to compete. But I will say that the one thing that was Saturday AM that I think is unique, and I think TOKYOPOP and other people are doing this as well, but it is different from the original OEL movement, because I reject this OEL title, because again, there are so many levels of this. Like I said before, people forget Reggie Byers and Ben Dunn and what they did back in the 80s. But look, there was a period with when Stu and TOKYOPOP were investing in independent creators, that one of the things that I did not like, one of the things that I've been very adamant about with Saturday AM is the one thing, just like hip hop, again, the one thing that does matter is authenticity. I can see a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid named Naruto Uzumaki. I'm never going to see that when I've walked the streets of Japan in real life. However, there's no doubt when I read that manga that he lives, that he culturally is a Japanese person. The culture is authentic. And from that standpoint, when young creators are creating content today, and we're bringing these kids from Senegal, from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Hungary, from Lithuania, the only thing we ask of them is to be authentic in what you're presenting. And I think a lot of times in the early era when TOKYOPOP was doing this, and not just TOKYOPOP to be fair, but it was, well, I'm creating a story. I'm a white kid from Nebraska, but my story is about a young Japanese kid from the streets of this island, and he wants to be a baseball player. And it's like, have you ever been to Japan? What do you know of Japan except for an anime? Like, please tell me that you have something authentic to say, rather than just you assuming that manga means you have to have a Japanese named character who just is your version of a Japanese character. It's no different than a person saying they want to make hip hop music and they twist their hat backwards, sag their pants, and start talking like this boy, and I think that somehow that makes them someone who can compete with a Jay-Z and a 50 Cent and Nas and some of these great lyricists of hip hop. That's all my thing is. There's a question of authenticity with manga, and I don't think that sometimes that I don't think every creator who draws in a manga style should be treated the same as a creator who understands the nuances of the serialization, like you talk about, the cliffhangers, and the ability to be able to be authentic in representing a community and a culture and a vision.
Well, I'd say what's really interesting about that is with manga, like the style. I will say that as someone who's been reading manga predominantly, I mean, I read American comics and I've been starting to read French comics as well. I find manga easier to read. Visually, it's easier to read because it's less dense visually. It's less wordy.
Yep.
Like it's a lot of manga is created by a single writer artist. So what I think a lot of American comics struggles with sometimes is they don't just show it; they have to say it and show it.
That's right.
And so it's very word dense. Whereas I think what manga does is it builds visual literacy.
Yes.
You see the emotions in the faces, you see the action, and for example, Kaoru Mori, she does a manga called A Bride Story and another one called Emma.
Yeah.
There are whole sections of the manga of her stories where you can just tell what the character is thinking just by looking at their facial expressions and how they interact with each other. And I think sometimes that's also social visual literacy, emotional literacy. So
100%.
like manga has this great thing where it can make you cry. Like it can make you really invested in the stories. Like if you've ever read One Piece, that part with Nami, like volume 10 or so, where Nami has to decide whether to go with Luffy or not.
That's
Like
right.
you cry.
Yeah.
Like, or the scene in like in Fruits Basket where it stops being a manga about boys who turn into animals when they get hugged by a girl. When it turns into this story about people overcoming their dysfunctional families and learning how to live, and overcome their trauma and become real people, on their own terms, find love on their own terms. You cry, So like manga has that ability to do that. And I that's what makes it so wonderful.
I agree.
So I want to, Kay, I want you to tackle this one. So with this kind of loosening of the definition of manga, where maybe 20 years ago there was a very hardcore, if it wasn't originally published in Japan by Japanese creators, it's not manga, to where now there's a loosening of that definition, and to the point, readers, I forget who said it earlier, readers kind of don't care in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
They want to read something that they're into. What does that do for, how has that affected the licensing decisions versus the decision to publish original content? And how important on the original side is the origin and background of the creator? Like, are we at where are we at a point with manga where licensing the original content from Japan, which Deb kind of noted, historically we've gotten the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more we've never seen in the US. How does that calculation work? And if you can talk a little bit about licensing, because I feel like a lot of manga fans don't understand why certain things aren't translated to English, because clearly there's an audience. Why won't you people publish this for us? I see that a lot on social.
Oh yeah, and we hear it a lot as well. I mean, I handle a lot of our emails that come through from our website, and most of the questions are, when are you going to license this? When are you going to relicense this? Sometimes I just take a quick look on Wikipedia and I'm like, someone's sitting on that license. I don't know what to tell you. Go bug them. They're the ones that have got it right now. And sometimes we had a title back in the day. This was right before the dreaded Borders going out of business, rocking the publishing world incident. And we had licensed a title that we paid a lot of money for, and no one bought it, or the sales were just so far below what we thought they were going to be. And when we took a quick look online, it turns out somebody had scanlated it, put the entire thing online for free, and it had over 1.5 million views. And we still get asked to this day for that title. People will email me and say, are you going to re-release this? And there's no gentle way to say no. We can't. It didn't do well then. Which I know scanlation is it's a whole rabbit hole to go down, and it's such a complicated topic. But when it comes to licensing, I mean, honestly, for us, largely what it comes down to is, do we believe in it? Do we think that there is something there? We have a whole imprint that we created that we ended up calling International Women of Manga, which was, as Frederick was alluding to, these people that had grown up reading manga from all around the world, different walks of life, that were like, I want to do that. And what they were creating was awesome. Again, they were telling their own authentic stories, and you could see, we get one from Italy, and you could tell which anime and which manga had been popular in Italy when they were growing up, because you could see the influence of Nana and these really 70s shoujo aesthetics coming through. Or you could see, wow, this one really looks a whole lot like Naruto, like One Piece. You could see the Shonen Jump aesthetics coming through, which I just think is really cool. You get this beautiful blend of bande dessinée, French and Belgian comics mixed with this stark black and white art, and maybe these tropes that you often see that come up through Japanese comics, and that you often see in manga, in Korean comics, and in Chinese comics as well. And I was at a convention in London once with some of these artists from Europe, and this guy came up to the table and he bought one of everything. And he said, if you'd tried to sell this to me 10 years ago, I'd have laughed at you and walked away. But now I'm willing to give it a try. because as Deb said, they just want to know it's good. They just want to see that it's actually good. So for us, you know, we've created some, I mean, we have a, you know, obviously we have a license with Disney, so we do some Disney stuff. Some of it is what we call pickups. Those are manga that already exist in Japan that we simply translate and release in English. And there's some, like our Nightmare Before Christmas series, that we wrote from scratch and we sent it to Japan for pencils, and then it comes back to the US for inking and coloring, but it reads right to left like a manga. So it's kind of this blend of Japanese art with Western graphic novel sensibilities. And I like to take people, it was the gateway drug. If you were into manga and wanted to get into Western comics, it was a good gateway there. Or if you were into Western comics and wanted to get used to manga, it's kind of like that sweet spot in between. So I'm loving seeing that we have loosened this definition, that it has become more acceptable. We still have people that come up to us at shows, typically teenagers, because teenagers are going to be teenagers, that will point at Stitch and the Samurai and say, "Who's that for?" And I'll say, "Not for you. It's okay for it to not be for you." But this 8-year-old kid that came running up to the booth squealing 10 minutes ago to buy a copy, it was for him. You know, he wanted to read it. And I think it's wonderful that it is expanding in such a way that there really is just something for everyone now, if you know where to look for it.
I will add, though, that with licensing manga from Japan, there's a layer of complexity that most readers don't understand, meaning that there are Japanese publishing companies that they are the home of that original work. And so Kodansha is one of the big publishers, and they have their own dedicated US branch who technically have first dibs on whatever Kodansha Japan has published, but not always. Then there's Shueisha and Shogakukan, which is the other two big companies. Shueisha is the home of Shonen Jump, and Shueisha and Shogakukan have a part ownership stake in Viz Media. So a lot of Shogakukan and Shueisha titles have Viz has first dibs on those. But these are not givens, right? Like there are some Shogakukan, Shueisha titles that got picked up by 7 Seas. There are some Kodansha titles that are being published by Yen Press, for example, or and Yen Press is majority owned by Kadokawa, which is another publisher. Square Enix is another manga publisher who has their own US division. But there is more manga being published in Japan by all of these companies than any of their US subsidiaries can publish. So to put it out there with licensing, one is the reason why, there's a couple of tried and true reasons why some things won't get licensed in English. And these are guidelines, not laws and rules, but these are kind of things. One is too old.
Oh yeah.
Old content has a harder time in US. It's too long. Anything over 10 volumes is challenging to license because everyone knows that the first volume will sell a lot and it'll go down this slope to the point where volume 30 barely sells anything, but they're on the hook to publish all 30 volumes. So a lot of manga publishers are a little reluctant to take on a longer series. For example, I'm a big fan of Hajime no Ippo, which is this boxing manga that has 100-something volumes. Ain't coming out in English.
No.
Unless, you know, but I mean, never say never, right? Because like if the manga publishing industry, which is super healthy right now, the healthier the manga industry is, the more chances they can take, right? Like 7 Seas is putting out Lupin the Third, you know, old. But you know, and they put out Devilman, Go Nagai, they put out there's a bunch of manga coming out now that is more edgy, that is less a sure thing. Like a lot of the sure thing is the shonen stuff, right? The shonen manga is the best sellers, the thing that everyone wants to buy and everybody knows. But if you're like a lot of manga readers, like maybe you started with shoujo, then now you're in your 30s, maybe you want something a little sexier, maybe you want something a little bit more that shows more complex human relationships. Those types of manga for josei manga used to be kind of iffy. But now it's because the manga industry is healthier now and more people are reading manga and keep reading manga, we're seeing more of that. So a lot of the old rules, like what gets licensed, what doesn't, are being bent. They still exist, but it's just to say that whenever people ask, why isn't this licensed? Why isn't that licensed? Why isn't it coming out faster? The other level of complexity is digital versus print. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Which is you can put out stuff in digital and less risk, right? You can put out faster, but you won't get as much financial return because the financial return on digital is less than print. But print is challenging right now because there's paper shortages and printer shortages. So whenever fans ask me like, why can't I get this manga in English? It's like, oh, honey, do you have an hour or two?
Right.
And a really interesting point that you just brought up there, Deb, with the paper shortages, which, oh my gosh, is such a reality right now, is sometimes we have a title and like you said, sales drop off after volume 1 and maybe we're on volume like 6 or 7 has sold out. And it's like, well, you don't want it to be gone,
Right.
but how do you justify a short print run? So we've been looking into things like print on demand, like very, very short runs for these titles. And a big challenge is a lot of these printers don't know how to print manga. So we're getting samples that are full of these moire patterns or like, they end up looking bad. And it's such a learning curve for us at least. And I feel like that's an industry-wide thing right now. All the challenges that are still affecting us from the pandemic definitely make it a question. And it's really hard. Like licensing is so complicated. And I do try to, when fans contact me and say, are you going to publish this title? I try to give them an honest answer about, listen, probably not. And here's why, because it's like 38 volumes, one of my favorite titles. I was hoping that we would make an offer on one of my favorite titles. I picked it up at a bookstore, fell in love. And then I looked it up and it was 27 volumes and ongoing. And I was like, never mind. It's fine. We're good.
I will say that, we've been approached to license Japanese manga. We haven't gone that route yet. We're continuing to lean and trying to lead in the diverse manga category. But I will say that, look, I mean, having been a fan of manga for a long time here in the West, there's inherently, we're in a better position than we've ever been. The choice is way beyond what it's ever been in the past. And so, when young people, what I would just say to the young people who are watching this broadcast and or those who are the librarians who are curious about it and getting these questions, it is far more possible than it's ever been. The fact that TOKYOPOP is doing more BL content, Mangasplaining has your deal, Deb, where you guys are producing some manga. You got that partnership, and these are not these are not the in your face wham bam manga. I think that these are all good things, and we're getting there. But the key thing though is what Kae hinted at. But I don't think people. I think we always talk in kind of code, and Guy, I talk very directly. So let me say this very clearly. This is a business, period. It's a business. And so when you see this old manga being reintroduced, it's because there's an anime or there's some level of support that it has. I've been enjoying the hell out of my Fist of the North Star representation by Viz. I still don't know why they bring it back because there's no anime for it, but I'm all for Fist of the North Star. JoJo, of course, is being supported by the anime. I have the Lupin collection that Deb talked about from Seven Seas. Again, I don't know if these will all be fundamentally successful, but what I do know is that an industry that can healthily support all of these options, including ours from Saturday AM, that's a good thing. And the industry is moving at a better position than it ever has been. Something that we tell all of our young fans and all of our young creators that they just don't know. And I say this to everybody, always be a fan of the business. Don't just be a fan of manga or comics, be a fan of the business. It'll tell you a lot more about what you love. And the thing about the business is that America ain't in the top two. Like it's Japan and France. And so when you realize that, you start realizing, oh, like we don't sell manga. Like all my friends talk about manga. Yeah. But in France, it's a whole different scale. It's a level of respect and a level of appreciation that the stores, the distributors, and the consumers have for that content, just like in Japan. Hence why you can have all this content in Japan that will never make it to America. So we have a long way to go in America. And this goes for every fan, every librarian. We have a long way to go to where josei manga are being regularly distributed here. I think Denpa does a lot of josei manga, but that it's regularly available, that people really know what it is, that we're routinely getting things. And my just thing on that is that if you look at America, if you look at sports, I'm a fan of sports. If you look at sports, the reason why America is because we have every sport. We have every sport. And that's how it is here with manga, right? Again, we've got Webtoon in bookstores. We've got American comic books in bookstores. We've got manga in bookstores, all genres. We have to be realistic. Like, not every country is doing all of that. They stop at one of those. The French are really good at French content and manga. They don't stock a lot of Marvel and DC. Some, but not a lot. The UK stocks some Marvel and DC, but they have a lot of Revolution, like 2000 AD and things like that. So it's, America is a home that has a lot of choice. And when you have a lot of choice, it does beg the question of, okay, so then what is it that's going to support the choice at retail to make all these esoteric manga actually make it to bookstores and to library shelves? And the reality is that it's really difficult unless there's something motivating it, like an anime or something, a new series that the creator might be coming out with, which spurs interest in the old series. And we're still too far away, I think, as a society in America to have embraced comic books at that level. This is not the 1930s when your comic books were selling millions of copies. This is today, where kids have Spotify, Instagram, OkCupid, you name it. They've got so many things that they can do with their spare time, including video games, that to say they're going to invest in manga, not to mention streaming manga as well, and scanlation, as Kae pointed out. There's a lot of challenges to a young person getting into manga, but I think we're still better off than we've ever been. I think we're going to get to that place eventually where the choices are much more relevant than they are today, but they're still good.
So I want to shift a little bit. We've kind of weaved in and out of our overall agenda, so I like that we didn't have to go down the scaffold. But I want to come back to this. So if the definition of manga has kind of blurred, and anything can be manga, because effectively manga are comics, but there are comics from Japan that people are into. Excuse me. What is, and some of what Frederick was just talking about in terms of sales and the diversity of just overall book selection in the US, manga currently is, I believe, the biggest selling category of the major categories of comics, and in some cases, one of the top 5, I think, overall categories in the publishing industry over the past 2 years, beyond just comics themselves. And there's a lot of young readers who are growing up with comics. I feel like comics skipped a generation or two. Particularly, I opted out of the 90s, but I wasn't a kid anymore. But I feel like there's a generation of kids the past 20 years who grew up with Wimpy Kid and First Second and kind of are growing up into these older genres. If anything can be manga, is there something that does explicitly define manga? And I want you, we've talked a little bit about authenticity. Let's talk a little bit about the cultural differences in manga from Japan, comics from Japan, that come here, because that tends to be one of the biggest eye-openers for librarians, teachers, parents. They know their kids are watching these cartoons, they're really into it, they're picking up the manga related to them. Then they start adding them to their library collections, and sometimes they're like, oh, wow, what's going on here? So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the unique cultural differences in comics from Japan that are notably different here in the US, and what that means in terms of age appropriateness, because in Japan and other countries, comics never fell into that, oh, they're for kids. Comics are a medium that people of all ages read in Japan, in France. Here.
No, I'm sorry. I don't remember. I was going to say, I can kick this off real quickly and then hop off and let the ladies speak, because I'm curious to hear what they have to say. But I will say there are 3 things I think that stand out immediately. Obviously, diversity, right? Like that one just is so obvious that again, the notion that there is manga and then things that aren't manga is irrelevant to the people who are like, I want to see more people like me. It doesn't matter at that point that someone's going to try to gatekeep them as to what is manga. If you've got a young Black child out there, male or female, like just the notion that they're going to be talked down about manga when there's a piece of content like Clock Striker that features them that aesthetically looks like manga, has the same energy of manga, it's irrelevant to them. So the diversity, the lack of diversity is a big thing. It's an elephant that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The second one is the fact that at the end of the day, yes, if you look at the Venn diagram of what is succeeding in America right now, and America, I can't speak to any other country, but there are two big categories. You said manga, you're right. What you left out was what challenges manga for success is young adult graphic novels. Scholastic is by far one of the best-selling comic book publishers, period, right now in America, and they're destroying it. Dav Pilkey with Dogman routinely outsells just about any book out there. So you can't ignore the significance of that. And why does that matter? Because that brings us to the third part, which is, yes, there's an appropriate question here because there are cultural differences. So Americans obviously are way too violent. We know this, all of us here know this. And so we love violence. We tend to punish sexuality. We tend to we look down upon questions of intimate, conversations and characterizations. Do the Japanese have a different view of that? Of course, and so, I'm not here to get into the debate of what's right or wrong, but if you're a librarian, I was asked this question at ALA. We love what you guys have because we have more diverse, we have a lot of diverse kids and we love what Saturday's doing. This is awesome. Is it appropriate for 10-year-olds? And then inevitably the question comes up because we stock, I won't say that, I don't want to, badmouth manga, because I love these manga, but there are popular manga that we all know that have panty fetishes, that the young female characters, do this. And my favorite part is they're like, because, we have that and we don't know, it's like we always feel bad when we see it. They're like, is it okay that we have it in our library? I said, well, it's really simple. Popular anime and manga, that's your answer. Like they don't have those same concerns. If that manga wasn't popular anime, if there wasn't a popular series, you can best believe you'd be getting in trouble. But how many people are going to be whining about and fighting about, DBZ or Naruto and things like that? So because those are just really popular series, that's just the nature of the beast. So I think that those three things do represent a challenge in terms of how we perceive manga, because the problem. And again, as a Black person, I'll say this: we had Clock Striker, the series behind me, went viral twice on Twitter. 2 reasons: Black women saw it and fell in love with it. They didn't know about it, fell in love with it. Like I wish this was a kid thing when I was a kid. Unfortunately, there was a small percentage, about 2% of the responses that were livid that we dare put a Black person in manga, that we were making manga political. I've been doing this for 9 years. We've gotten this type of debate for 9 years. We've gotten this type of racist hatred for 9 years. We're not the only ones. Black cosplayers get it. Black voice actors get it in the world of anime and manga. And my point in raising that is that I think there's another part of this that affects the cultural part of it, which is that there are a lot of people who seem to be working really hard to keep manga and anime white. And it's a strange thing, it's an odd thing, but there is a definite
which is ridiculous because manga and anime is Asian to begin with.
100%, 100%, 100%. But no, you're 100% right. But I promise you, if you look at some of the comments, Corto, our distributor, was shocked when they saw. I told them at the very beginning this was going to happen, and they were shocked when they saw some of the comments we got. And the thing is, when you go into the timeline of these people. Oh, these are hardcore anime manga fans. They've got the stuff all over their profiles. And my reason for bringing this up is that the appropriateness of it is because in their mind, this sort of right-wing vision of whatever it is they feel like they're arguing about, what they really hate is they hate the diversity. They hate LGBTQ content being in manga, which has also always been in manga. They hate it chiefly because at the end of the day, in their view, manga celebrates one type of aesthetic. And that aesthetic also reinforces their existence, so they love it. And it features sexualization of women. That when you're on the other side of the political spectrum, that's something that works for them. Like the idea that so what? It's a young female character. What do you care? It's fictional. These are the arguments you literally hear if you go into these debates. And so I think that these things all play a narrative, they play a role in how manga is perceived. Manga is perceived the way that all of us view it, which is this gorgeous visual narrative art form that has so much diversity already and so much potential. And then it's viewed by some people, either ignorantly or purposefully, as a very narrow set of definitions that works for them because of their own political dispositions. And
But I want to jump in here and kind of mention something about some of the cultural differences that maybe might be illuminating for librarians. One is that Japan is not a monotheistic society. There is Shinto, there is Buddhism, there's Christianity, you know, but there's not one religion to rule them all. Also, too, if you've ever been in Japan, they're very comfortable with nudity. If you're a young kid and you go to the public bathhouse with your parents, you know, and being nude, you know, in as a group with group bathing is, you know, just it's part of life, right? Like if one thing that Japan, like what happens when, you know, people go to Japan for the first time and they go to a hot spring or they go to Sento, and I've seen tourists try to wear bathing suits in the hot springs. And it's like, no, you just be nude. Everybody does it. You know, so there's that cultural difference, whereas there's greater comfort. There's a different comfort level in nudity. Like, for example, in Dragon Ball, in the first volume of Dragon Ball, there's a character named Goku, and he's like a monkey. He's like based off the Monkey King. He has a little monkey tail. He's a little boy, and there's this famous scene where he's nude, like he's got his little baby size thingy, and he's kicking somebody. This is completely non-sexual, but in America, this automatically makes this manga not for kids. In My Hero Academia is one of the most popular comics in the world, not just manga, popular best-selling comics in the world. And then I've heard from like a comics book merchant in Ireland, Dublin, tell me, oh, a parent brought back the copy of My Hero Academia Volume 1 because it's a picture of one of the characters, Mountain Lady, on the back, and she's got her butt like to the camera, you know, like she's wearing a skin-tight outfit. She's not naked, but apparently this was beyond the pale for, or even in Naruto, one of the key things that Naruto does is he does this thing where he makes duplicates of himself, and because he's such a prankster, he makes like duplicates of himself as a sexy woman who is kind of barely naked. In Japan, that is hilarious for a young reader, you know, but in certain parts of America, that is just unacceptable. So that's what makes manga a kind of a minefield, I think, sometimes for librarians, because one thing that's difficult is that in Japan, there are manga published in different magazines for different age groups, right? Nakayoshi, for example, is a shoujo manga magazine aimed at younger girls. That's where Sailor Moon was originally published. That's where Kitchen Princess was originally published. But there's also a shoujo manga magazine called Cheese, which publishes a story called Yakuza Lover, which is very, very sexy. And it's aimed for readers 16 and up. Now, those definitions are clear if you read the manga magazines, but because we bring them all here just as standalone series, you don't have that context. And everything in America is shelved alphabetically, meaning you don't have a section that is the adult, the manga for people 16 and up. You don't have the section where manga that's good for kids under 12. And sometimes the art is not a clue either. Like you'll sometimes see very cute looking characters doing things that you go, oh no. So I see and hear you, librarians of the world, and I sympathize with your plight. I would say to you, Frederick, that and I've said this to a couple of original, people who are creating manga outside of Japan. This is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to create content for younger readers, because Japan is not able to meet that challenge right now. I'm sorry to say. Many people have tried. I mean, Doraemon, for example, is one of the most popular kids comics in Japan. It's only available on Kindle. And like another one is Case Closed, which is called Detective Conan in Japan, about a boy detective. He's an 18-year-old boy. He gets turned into a young boy detective. And he's super smart and he's really clever. Super popular in Japan for kids. It is rated 16 plus in America because there are murder scenes. So I'm just saying there is no easy answer out here. I'm sorry.
We're usually
There
okay with
really isn't.
murder.
Yeah, well, one thing that you said there, Deb, that got me was we have a series that is perfect for kids. It's lovely. I've read it and it's beautiful. It's very Japanese. It's called Konohana Kitan, and it is set at this like supernatural hot spring, where all of these gods and spirits come, and these fox girls, sort of you learn about sort of Shinto beliefs, Buddhist beliefs, these various like very Japanese concepts. But in the very first chapter, they're in a hot spring. There are some naked breasts because people are naked in the hot spring. It's not sexualized at all. And because of that, we had to mark it 16 plus, which is frustrating for us as a publisher because we don't want to censor the title. But because I know they did that with some early Dragon Ball stuff, they put little clouds in front of his crotch so you wouldn't see like, what was going on. But this is why, I mean, this is why we really pursue this Disney line that we have, because we know, I mean, Disney will not say yes to anything if they're not completely happy with it. We have actually had them contact us for a pickup title. It already exists in Japan, already been published and printed and licensed by Disney, and they said Tinkerbell's skirt is too short. Well, first of all, you designed the character, so that sounds like a you problem. But also, this is you already okayed this, but sure enough, we had to move a speech bubble to cover the bottom of her skirt. But one thing that we've been doing, which we've gotten a lot of really good feedback for this, and I really do hope that other publishers follow suit with this, other manga publishers, is we put content warnings on the back of our titles. So we will have something that will say non-sexual nudity, or maybe there's drug use in this one, or maybe there's a bunch of curse words, or, things like that. Or with our BL titles, sometimes you might have to say, hey, there might be some sketchy consent in this one. Maybe someone really wants to read that, and maybe someone doesn't want anything to do with that. We even had one recently that had animal death. It had the whole story was about reincarnation and this dog coming back as a man. And we got a review in from somebody who said, because I was prepared for it, I very much enjoyed the book. But I think if I hadn't known that was going to be there before I went in, it would have blindsided me and I would have come out having a bad experience with it. And I think really, when it comes to cultural differences like that, when it comes to nudity, when it comes to violence, anything like that, the best thing we can do is just try to be aware of it. And that way, with you guys as librarians, obviously, you know your kids, you're going to know you've got that kid who comes in and you're like, they read at an older level, or they're a little more mature, they can handle some slightly older material, or the kids where you're like, they're not ready for this, they're maybe not ready for something like Food Wars or Tokyo Ghoul, or something that's going to be very graphic for them. But I think as the publishing industry, we need to be on top of putting that information out there and making sure people know what they're picking up off the shelf and what the content of the book is going to be.
Yeah, well, we designed our books. Sorry, I was gonna say real quick, when we designed our books, we had to create, to Kae's point, we had to create our own rating system to ensure, because there's not a universal standard for manga, and as one, which is, I mean, it is what it is, but like there's not one. So we had to create one, and we did color coded, and we do lots of things to ensure that there's a levels to it, right? So the more sophisticated Saturday reader will understand, oh, this has a purple, so this means this is a title that's going to be more LGBTQ compliant, going to offer more female perspectives. This is red, just going to be more shonen, things of that nature, and so are orange. I mean, so that I think is really important. I couldn't agree with Kae more that all of us, the three of us on this panel, being such pet lovers, that would destroy me. There's that great manga Genga something or another, I forget the name of it, from Japan, and just it's such a cool manga, but the death scenes just killed me. They literally killed me. I just couldn't get through the manga because of that. I even thought about, that was a title I thought about licensing, actually, and it just killed me. I just couldn't get past it. So Yeah, I think that's really important thing for librarians is to know that the publishers that, that many of us are taking the steps to ensure that we're providing you with the information that goes beyond just the blurb on the back, but just really specific information that helps you guys understand what would be appropriate at the right level. And we even go as far as putting country flags as well, because you may have a young student body that represents, you may have a sizable South Asian population or African population, and we try to make sure that you have that as a means to graduate your readers into something that you feel like may be culturally appropriate for them. So
I think it's quite challenging too, because manga, as we know, is the biggest market for manga is in Japan.
yes.
And a lot of times they're creating manga just for their own market, right? For
Mhm.
their readers first. One thing that I do try to explain to people is that the North American manga market is actually not the biggest market in the world for manga. We're actually half the size of the French market, half.
That's right.
And there's also, so the Japanese publishers can very merrily just continue to making manga for their audience first. However, what's happening demographically is the Japanese population is aging. And so a lot of the manga magazines are losing readership, both to digital and the fact that, there's not enough kids anymore. So they're now looking towards overseas more. They're more than they ever have before. They're more interested, and I've talked to them, and they are shocked at the reaction that their books get overseas, because they're trying to get it published in Saudi Arabia, they're trying to get it published in South America, they're trying to, even Korea, which has a bigger concentration of Christian population and Christian morality, has much stricter rules about nudity and violence and much stricter age ratings. So I think there's also too, like, Japan is a quite homogeneous society. Even though there is a lot more people from outside Japan now, there's more Black, there's more people from other parts of Asia, there's more white people, there are more mixed kids, but predominantly it is Japanese. So I think when you talk about the lack of diversity sometimes in manga, I don't think it comes from a place of malice. I think it comes from a place of ignorance, meaning that they don't know what to do. Like I see this like a Spike Trotman, who's on Twitter, who I follow.
Oh, right. Yeah.
She does some really great, and I've seen other Black artists do this too. They say, this is how you draw black hair.
Right.
And they said, by the way, this is how you draw black hands. It is lighter on the palm.
Right.
This is how you draw Black people's, lips and stuff like that. And they're doing it as education. Yeah. They're saying, we don't like, you don't like Osamu Tezuka, who's like the god of manga, right? He is like the guy who set the template. Everybody, right. He did Astro Boy. He influenced so many people. Shotaro Ishinomori, Cyborg 009. These books were created in the 60s and 70s, and they have some characters that, frankly, are pretty black simp, pretty cringeworthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a series called Jungle Tiger, Kimba, that has never been published in English because of how Black people are depicted in that story.
Yeah.
They're deathly afraid of publishing in English because of its problematic aspect. So, but so Cyborg 009, which has a multicultural array of superheroes, an American Indian, an Englishman, a Black man, Chinese man. Like, the original character designs were very stereotypical.
Yep.
In other iterations of Cyborg 009, like other artists have done it, you can compare it and see that there's so much more sensitivity about how they depict these characters. So I think Japan is evolving.
100%.
And we're seeing, they're getting a positive feedback loop from overseas, like Fire Force, for example, right? Fire Force David Brothers and I were talking about this on Mangasplaining, has this effortless diversity in it, meaning like it's not like it's not like in Naruto where all the black characters come from this particular
That's
place,
right. That's
right?
right. Right.
You're
Right.
like, oh,
Right.
and there's one who's a rapper, right? It's like, oh, they
That's
come from
right.
this
That's right.
certain place. In Fire Force, it's like, oh, there's a
Yeah.
dark skin character, there's a medium, there's a tan skin character, and they
Mhm.
don't come from any particular place.
Right.
They just are. And I think that's where manga is heading.
Without question, without question, and you know, look, I mean, so we create, I don't know if I can show this on camera, but you know, our bestseller, we released 11 books this year. Our bestseller is How to Draw Diverse Manga, and this has been outside of Apple Black, and it's been hugely successful, mainly because again, a lot of young people want to create a more diverse type of manga for several reasons. One, because you know, their characters, they want characters not to stand out. And, you know, a lot of times we can only do so many spiky hair characters. The Japanese know what they're doing, but everyone else is emulating it. So there's a lot there to it. Taikuba, by the way, is one who is another artist who effortlessly involves diversity. And that's why his popularity in the Black community is extremely high. But that being said, though, I think that, you know, every culture is changing. And so that's the great thing about where we are right now. That's the great thing about globalization. But that also is why SciRDM exists. I mean, the bottom line is that, you know, people aren't going to wait for someone to figure it out. There are people who are doing it. There are people who are doing it well. And so we want to make sure that we provide those creators an opportunity. They should not have to wait. As I said to people all the time, a lot of our young creators, someone has asked me consistently in every interview I've done is, you know, what was one of the reasons you started Saturday AM the way you did? And I said, simple. The vast majority of people are never going to go to Japan. The vast majority of people are never going to speak Japanese. Those two things right there will prevent you from creating a manga in Japan. Let's say Japan let's say Shueisha all of a sudden had an epiphany. You mean black people buy manga? Let's make a black manga tomorrow. It is not going, if you can't speak Japanese and you're not going to create Japanese content, it ain't happening. It's not happening. And I mean, and that's just common sense. We all know that. Anyone who's dealt with the Japanese community knows that. So that is a reality. And some of it is conservatism. Some of it is like, you know, we don't want to do a bad job, so why would we take this risk on? Other part of it is just a question of like, you know, we don't understand what even we would do with it. So yes, the industry is going to change because other groups are changing it. That's why it's going to change. And the reality of sales is that, as I said before, you know, Apple Black is sitting on shelves right now in Walmart, and we're in 24 countries. Apple Black is sitting next to several times and is outselling a lot of those Japanese titles. So our view is frankly that, you know, we've seen this growing diversity of the fan base who have been screaming, they've been literally screaming for people to recognize them. And we're trying to create content for it. I see the success of Boys Run the Riot. I see the success of some of the stuff that TOKYOPOP is doing. And that tells me that there are young gay creators, gay fans who are screaming for content that legitimizes and validates their life. And when you see great content that comes out for it, you're not sitting there worried about where it's from. If I'm not mistaken, Kae, a lot of your titles aren't from Japan, aren't they? Some of those titles are manhwa, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have some manhwa. We have to go back to what we were saying earlier, we pick the content that is good, regardless of where it is from. And when you've been at a trade show, at a convention, and you've seen a kid's face when they open a book and see themselves looking back, I mean, I'm getting choked up thinking about it. It is. There was a little black girl that came up to our booth once, picked open a book, and she had this gorgeous hairstyle. And I said, you know who you look like? And I opened the book and I showed her what the author looked like, who was a young Black German woman. And this girl turned around, held it up to her mom and said, Mom, she looks like me. And I almost started crying right there, because I'm like, it's wonderful. It's amazing. And I think that, you know, but also to talk about, we were talking about cultural differences, the heavy Japanese cultural aspects in manga, they're why I learned Japanese. Like, I fell in love with it, and that opened my perspective and made me want to learn more about Japan as well. So that goes both ways. Like, being able to see your own culture represented is phenomenal, but also being able to open your mind and learn more about a culture that you may not have understood before. I mean, you know, I'm learning more about Korean culture through manhwa and through the the huge emphasis that Korea is getting in pop culture nowadays. So I think
Okay,
it's,
that's my point about authenticity. That's all my point is about
yes,
authenticity. When something is authentic, what it does to the reader, it go, as Deb said before, manga is one of the few art forms that just it just has such an emotional grasp on you. And let's not crap on American creators. There's some great American creators who do the same thing, but the Japanese are really good at it, and they really are able to draw the emotion. And one of the things as well with the authenticity that they do is that it makes you want to, like, why are people so fascinated by the cherry blossoms? Why are they so fascinated by the cherry blossoms? I want to see these cherry blossoms. It makes you want to just, explore. And the same thing with Korea, and we hope the same thing with our content. But I think that's what look, diversity starts stories. It's not a stopgap. It starts stories. The minute you pose the question of what would this be like, it opens up so many potentials. And manga has already had such great diversity in terms of genre and ideas that that just is just another facet of it. One last thing I'll say real quickly is that when Deb spoke before, because I want to make this point about American versus Japanese manga. Look, Japanese manga, Deb, you said it before. I think you said I agree with you about the way manga tells stories, but I also think we have to be realistic about a couple of things. One is that, yeah, the Japanese spend a lot of time on facial reactions. Why? Because the comics come out every week. Like the American comics come out every month. You got 20 pages to tell a Spider-Man story, and Stan Lee perfected this idea of, I've got 25 pages to tell a story every month of Spider-Man. Instead of me beginning with Peter Parker being broke and lamenting how broke he is, why not just have him literally swinging through the city going, oh man, I don't know why I'm swinging tonight, but I take my mind off the fact that I can't afford groceries. It's like, and he just gives you that action to do it. All of these styles work. I mean, the great Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman have given us incredible works that are just undefinable, beautiful, despite not being manga. So to me, manga is like music. Again, it's like hip hop. There's a rhythm to it. You've got to understand the rhythm, and the rhythm is what really makes it tick. But again, they do a great job with those things because at the end of the day, they just have more time to do it. I mean, that's the reality. And by the way, the negative side of that, as we've all seen, is that a lot of these guys like Kishimoto, the great Kishimoto, didn't even get to spend honeymoon with his wife until like after Naruto had ended. I mean, so that's not an American scenario. Like, yes, I don't think I could survive that. I don't think an American can survive that. That wife would truly, that relationship would end immediately. So it's a different cultural aspect as well of creating content. And I think the key thing is just being able to identify and recognize for librarians, for young people, why this art form is so beautiful, is so dominant. And the bottom line with it is that it's just got such an extraordinary, it's like trying a different type of food. You may love cheeseburgers, but the minute you try a great gnocchi from Italy, you realize how the blend of flavors are so different and so amazing. And I think that's how manga is. It's just a different way of doing it. But when you experience it, especially from the best creators, oh my God, it's such a freeing experience. It's so just extraordinary, just how well it's put together like a symphony. It's incredible.
So as much as I want this to keep going, like an hour and a half manga explaining episode, we're running a little long. So one thing I want to cap, and so what I'm taking away from this conversation about the definition of manga, and particularly from the way we get the question from librarians a lot, is, understand what you're asking when you're asking that question. Are you literally asking about comics from Japan, or are you asking about comics that might be of interest to fans of what they or you might think is manga? Because what do I read after Naruto may be a different question from what do I read that I might be into, and I'm into this anime. It may or may not be Japanese manga. It may be something from Saturday AM. It may be something from TOKYOPOP's non-Japanese creators lines. So, from a librarian perspective, one of the questions I want you guys to take a shot at answering that we get a lot, and I think it's a difficult question to answer, is understanding the cultural differences, understanding the nuance, even if you get shonen, shoujo, josei, what's the S one?
Seinen.
Seinen. Even if you get those distinctions, one of you noted that even in shonen, or I think it was shoujo, there's 2 levels of shoujo in Japan. So that's not a catch-all for, if it's shoujo, that's for young girls, not necessarily. So with all of these nuances, and you don't necessarily know much about manga yourself, what are some resources you'd recommend to librarians to kind of educate themselves a little bit more so that they can make smart decisions about their collection and not dismiss a My Hero Academia, let's say, because of one panel, or be aware of it and make a decision appropriate for their community? So give me one resource each that you'd kind of point out, whether it's a source for reviews, better understanding of, the uniqueness of different manga publishers, any particular advice you can give there.
I would say School Library Journal, Good Comics for Kids, is a great resource. They do a lot of manga reviews and book, graphic novel reviews, and they do it with librarians in mind. I think that's a great start. No Flying, No Tights is also great for that. It's run by librarian Robin Brenner, and she also is a big manga fan. She actually wrote a book about manga in libraries some years ago, and so she's an excellent resource. There's also mangainlibraries.com. Jillian Rudis has that website. She runs webinars, and she also has lists. She's writing a book, and it's coming out next year from ALA. There are several. Kae, Frederick, how about yours?
I agree with everything Deb said. I mean, all those people. Jillian is wonderful, and there's Kirkus Reviews will review stuff, and they take a critical lens to it, but they do a good job. They don't always review manga, but they do a good job of identifying what works in certain stories. I would love, because I think Deb's list is fairly definitive. I would love to be able to offer something in the way of someone who could speak to maybe the nuance of diversity with it, but I just can't. I haven't seen that, frankly. Just haven't seen a dedicated group that does that. There are several groups who approach us, but I've never seen one who has a sort of following that would make that conducive to view, or the consistency to it. But I do think that the list Deb gave is perfect.
Yeah, very, very much agree with everything that Deb said. Funnily enough, there's a little outlet that's been writing some incredible reviews of our titles, but of other titles as well. Anime News UK, because their reviews are so thoughtful, and they go through translation, and they look at editing, and they look at content, and they just do a phenomenal job of coming at it from a fan perspective, but actually looking at the more technical details that go behind creating it. So I highly recommend them. And also reach out to publishers. I know that we have a manga 101 like cheat sheet that we put together for a few trade shows. I know that Viz has their own packet that they give out at retailer shows as well. I guarantee other publishers have the same thing. We're very used to there. We have a dedicated librarian newsletter that we send out, which we actually include PDF review copies of our titles that are coming out, specifically so that librarians can read through and you can see the content for yourself. You can actually take a look and see if it works. Obviously you can contact me, Kae@TOKYOPOP.com. I'd be more than happy to add anyone to that list, but I guarantee other publishers have very, very similar programs as well, and they're going to be very used to answering those kinds of questions, and should be very, very happy to answer any very specific questions that you may have.
So Kay shamed me. She shamed me by because I forgot. We Mel Shoot, Sweet Shoot, I'm not sure I say her last name. She's a wonderful part of Corto Group, who is the group that publishes and distributes our book globally. We have partnerships with other group companies like Media Do. But either way, she put together a thing. I remember we had to get her access. She's putting together a thing for librarians to do exactly what Kay talked about. It's like a sampler pack. It'll be printed, and they can access it and get first chapters of all of our work, and then get some additional details that advise how these books would fit within their library. So yes, that is something that's done for Saturday M titles as well. We stole the idea from TOKYOPOP.
I put a few in the chat, but it was like, where do I get manga news, and where do I stay on top of things? Anime News Network is an outlet I used to write for, and they still put out a lot of reviews and news, and I find them really helpful. I write for Publishers Weekly. Mostly I do like a once or twice a year manga roundup like about the business, but they also have manga reviews there. There's also this is a weird one. It's called the OASG.com. It's the OASG stands for the Organization of Antisocial Geniuses. But now that sounds very, very quirky, but they write very, very thoughtful reviews. Another one is Anime Feminist. They look at anime and manga from a feminist point of view, meaning they're a good way of looking at like some of the tropes in manga and anime that are maybe not so cool with women, you know, and they give you interest. They look at it in a very fair and balanced way. For Japanese, in Twitter, I follow Manga Mogura. Mogura means mole. He keeps on top of all the new releases in Japan, in Europe, and in the US. Just by having him in my feed, I learn about so much. You know, series that just debuted in Japan. Comics Natalie is another good one. That's a Japanese news site. That's where Google Translate comes in. You open up Comics Natalie on Chrome and you hit the little translate button, and voila, you get a vague idea of what's going on in Japan. It's that simple. And shameless plug, Mangasplaining.
I was getting ready to say, yeah, Mangasplaining.
Yes. Yeah.
Highly recommended.
Yeah,
we have our podcast, which maybe gives you a little bit too much information about manga, but we do have, if you're looking at it, 80-something episodes, how can I ever? We do have one episode where we pick the best of season 1 of the books that we found would be the most appealing to people who are new to manga.
That's where I started.
Yeah.
Because at first I was like, these are way too long. I'm not jumping into these. And then it's like, let me try this one. And I think 3 books I were like, oh, I went and bought them. So careful what you ask for. Resources can turn into a bottomless well of books you're buying. So recommendations. Let's go so with this expanded loose definition of manga, and it's come up a few times in the conversation, one of the biggest challenges of manga is super long series, super long in Japan, not as long here yet, and possibly not going to finish. What are some recommendations? Give me one recommendation each, one for younger readers and one for older readers, however you might define that, for either a really short series, say no more than 5 volumes complete, or a standalone that you would recommend. And Deb, I know you do this like right off the top of your head, so I'll put you on the spot first, and then we'll go to Frederick, then Kae. Caveat, Frederick and Kae, not your own titles.
Fair.
I'll throw Kae a softball here. For young readers, I like The Fox and the Little Tanuki.
Yes.
That's a really delightful, it's kind of there's a very short list of manga for young readers, and this one doesn't get mentioned very often, and it deserves to be, because it is just adorable. It really is about a fox and a little badger, and the artwork is really appealing, and the story is really charming. And I promise there are no sketchy parts that will have angry parents beating down your door. It's also really fun. It's fun for all ages. I'll say, and as far as one for older readers, you know, I gotta. This is so hard because I could name 20. Okay, so it looks like Chainsaw Man is like the hottest manga out there now, and I introduced it at the Harvey Awards as a heartwarming story about a boy, his demon chainsaw dog, and his quest to get laid. That pretty much sums up that book. It is wild and funny and violent, and it should be for readers 16 and up, but I'll tell you, it'll take you on a ride.
My son's enjoying that one right now. He's 22, so sweet spot. All right, Frederick, younger readers and then older readers.
So I'm not gonna lie, I don't read a lot of young manga, so I really can't offer much to it. I would say, like, you know, the licensed video game stuff like Legend of Zelda or Super Mario. I mean, I really don't read a lot of young manga. For older manga, you know, I would say, I mean, look, I think this, I don't really, and when it comes to manga, you're talking to people who aren't hardcore manga fans. I really don't know anything you can recommend in the older category, but Death Note. I think Death Note just is, it's just such a, as I tell people all the time, it's 12 volumes. It finished years ago and is still one of the most popular manga here in the West. That says pretty much all you need to know. I mean, it's not, the thing I love about Death Note as well, it's not shock value. Like I really can't say I loved Chainsaw Man. I thought it was wild. It's, to me, no different than The Boys. It was just like a lot of shock for shock value. But at the end of the day, like, Death Note is just, I still continue to think about just there's so many gorgeous scenes. And it's, when you talk about the medium of manga and how manga is able to do the things that Deb talked about, the cliffhangers, the ability for characters to communicate without like actions, the way Marvel Comics would do. Death Note, like, literally is that. Like, it's literally Death Note. I've got the full collection back there. Yep, I've got the full collection.
I've got it all in Japanese on my shelf over here too. It's a classic for a reason.
I've got my Japanese versions as well as the American versions. I just think it's just such a wonderful manga, and there's never been a person who's not into manga that I've recommended it to, who's not come to, they may not necessarily have stuck with manga, the rest reading experiences, but they all have enjoyed Death Note. I mean, it just really is a pinnacle effort in the realm of manga, at least in the West, I would say.
2 years ago, when I decided, all right, I'm going to give manga a real shot, Death Note is where I started. And that black collection they have condenses it to 6 volumes, I think, instead of 12. So still costs money, but yeah, I would go with that one as well.
I spend money what you love, Guy. Like, there's
exactly.
That's
Yeah.
great. That's great.
All right, Kate.
I'm so glad that Deb said Fox and Little Tanuki, because that was actually going to be my recommendation before the caveat. But along those lines, because I just love cute animals, I gotta say Cheese Sweet Home is about a kitten. And it's told from the kitten's perspective of learning how to kitten, how to cat, how to family life. It's absolutely adorable. It's so cute. It's such a good one for younger readers. And I mean, I'm 39 and I love it. So it transcends age barriers. For older readers, I was thinking one that I have been personally enjoying, Dungeon Meshi, which has been released as Delicious in Dungeon. I think that's Yen Press. I think. Absolutely phenomenal. I mean, the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons now, it's about a group of dungeon explorers that they end up in a dungeon and they've run out of provisions, they've run out of food, and they meet this dwarf who's like, don't worry, I'll teach you how to cook the monsters down here. So it's part D&D adventure, it's part cooking manga. It's absolutely hilarious. And another one just to throw in real quick, because we were talking about Death Note, anything by Junji Ito for me, for older readers. I mean, he's an absolute legend. We were talking about Osamu Tezuka earlier, but Junji Ito is Uzumaki is phenomenal. Most of his stuff is they do entire story collections where you get just a lot of short stories in one, like 2-3 page stories, or you get like Uzumaki where you can get a beautiful collector's edition. It's very much for older readers. It's pretty hardcore violence and gore and horror, but for older readers, it's a surefire hit.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to close on this question. You're a librarian or an educator. You have readers of whatever age levels really into manga. You are not and don't want to be. You just want to serve your readers. What are some recommendations that you would make to effectively promote manga in your library, even if you yourself are not a fan, don't get it, possibly even don't like it? And we'll go backwards. Kae, Frederick, Deb.
Are we able to choose our stuff, Guy?
Yeah, this is free for all.
Okay,
It can be a
I was gonna say,
particular
like,
title, it can be a technique, it can be an activity, anything.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, one thing that we've been pushing at TOKYOPOP lately is our Love imprint, which is romance, but it involves all romance. We've got some shoujo stuff. We've got some boys love, girls love, which is the LGBTQ titles. We've got a little bit of everything in there. We have everything from like 13 plus, at best there's a kiss on the cheek, up to the 18 plus titles. So there really is the full gamut there. And when we've pitched this, a lot of librarians have used that as a way to create a safe space for queer kids in their community. And we've even had librarians from very, very, very conservative communities who have said, I want this to be a safe space. I want this place to be for kids to really be themselves and get to explore things. We've even got a title, Our Not So Lonely Planet Travel Guide, that has transgender representation and discussions of gender expression in Thailand, and has that beautiful diversity of a couple traveling the world and getting to see all these countries. So I think it's really look at your readership, look at what kind of space you are trying to cultivate. Are you trying to create something that's great for kids? Then really, really lean into those kid titles. If you're looking for, like I said, a queer safe space, look for titles that are going to emphasize that. And again, I would say reach out to publishers and ask what kind of support they have for librarians, because we will send free swag to you. We will support you in any way that we can. We'll have a conversation. We'll give you a list. If you say, this is the age range I'm looking for, what do you got? I'll cultivate that list for you and send you PDF copies. So, really don't be afraid to ask publishers for help as well, I would say, because we're here for you. That's what we want to do. And I'm sure Frederick would agree. We're happy to give you whatever we can to help you make the best decisions for your readers.
Sure, yeah. For me, well, look, I'm going to go all Saturday in here, so I'm going to let that be known right now. But I will say that I would hope, first and foremost, every librarian supports the works. I know, obviously, TOKYOPOP's got an incredible library. Mangasplaining has got a recent program they're initiating to bring manga to readers. And the reason I say it is because I think sometimes I do hope libraries, much like when I was a child, are labs of experimentation and not labs of feeding what already exists, right? I mean, these kids already know how to get My Hero Academia. They already know how to get Naruto. Not saying not to stock it, but I think libraries are a great opportunity for young kids to expand and to try new ideas. And I hope the librarians are advocates and stewards of that, as much as, giving the kids, these kids what they say they want, try to help them expand as well and try new things. With that being said, with Saturday AM, we have 11 titles. We just started releasing our titles in June of this year. And I'm very proud of the fact that we released 11 titles. We are much smaller than like a TOKYOPOP, and yet we released 11 titles this year. And I'm very proud of that. And the books are doing great. But the three that I would recommend for quite a few reasons are, again, first and foremost, How to Draw a Diverse Manga Book. As I indicated, this is a really great book. It takes the manga aesthetic and allows young creators, of which many of those young fans who are reading manga, I don't think there's a kid that reads manga doesn't think at first about creating their own manga. Every kid thinks about it. We draw the spiky hair, we draw the big eyes, and then we start realizing whether or not we actually have the ability to. But now social media and the ability for them to post stuff online via Webtoon or Instagram or whatever, this is just a really great book that we really took a lot of care in about talking about what makes manga manga, and then identifying the specific elements of ethnicity that is authentic and not exploitive. There's so many times, as we talked about in manga, where even recently, where characters sometimes just have these generic big lips and these big noses, and they kind of look stupid, and you're like, why? Let's show the diversity of appearances for everybody and make everyone a hero and everyone a villain, as well as, by the way, females. I think sometimes they get talked about enough as well in Japanese content, where a lot of the characters are very thin. This is normal, this is cultural, but in the rest of the world, everyone is thin, and our heroines can be plump, and they can be, different body shapes, and we need to champion everybody having their stories told, and not just one particular vision, whether it's the muscle chest things and stuff of Marvel and DC, or just really thin characters in manga and manhwa. We want to try to show that there's beauty in all sorts of people. So the book really does that. And one of the great things about something that Kae was just talking about that I want to really reiterate with us, with our manga, and again, we create diverse manga, so it's different. It's going to be very similar to what these young people will enjoy, but it's going to be different in terms of the presentation of character. But I would say this: our creators are global, but they are largely here. So if we've already signed up 88 schools to do Zoom calls with. I would love to, as a kid, have been able to get Toriyama to do that, but probably wasn't going to happen. But we definitely have that ability. White Manga has 500,000 followers on YouTube. He's our biggest celebrity. most of your kids probably have at least seen one of his videos. So we are here. We're committed to making sure that if you guys have interest in our content, whether it's creating content from a tutorial standpoint or understanding more about what we did in our content, our creators will be made available. Apple Black is our biggest title. It's by a Nigerian artist, White Manga. As I indicated, anyone who loves Bleach, loves Naruto will appreciate this title that blends cultural references in from Muslim culture, from African culture, from Pan-African culture. It's a very diverse mix, even though the lead character looks like your standard Japanese character. And then the last one's Clock Striker. It's our second biggest title. It's already pre-ordered quite crazy. It stars a Black female lead character. It's illustrated by a French creator. It's been in all of our books have been endorsed by Tony Valenti and Sanford Green and a number of great creators. This is a big one. This is one that essentially, if any kid loves Naruto, especially female readers, this is a female protagonist, a straight shonen series, action-packed series about a young girl who wants to be a smith. She wants to be an engineer. I took that concept from Black Girls Code, and this is a young girl who wants to be an engineer. In her world, engineers are warriors, so they get to build stuff, they get to destroy stuff, and so everyone wants to be them, but you can only be it if you're really smart. She comes from a small town where they don't have the best resources. Sounds very familiar. And she meets one of the few female smiths named Miss Clock. And blacksmiths back in the day, their assistants were called strikers. So the series is called Clock Striker. And Cass, who's our young female heroine, she's only used to building junk and making it work in tech. And now she's got to work on a much higher scale against bad guys and bandits and high-powered groups. But it's a really fun series, and the artist is not just of African descent who lives in France, but he's an engineer. So we invoke a lot of engineering principles into it, so young people can learn something along the way as well.
Cool. Yep.
Repeat the question. I want to make sure I'm answering your question.
So if you're a librarian or a teacher who's aware of the interest in manga, but you personally no interest, don't want to learn the nuances of manga, don't want to read manga, but you want to serve your readers, what are some recommendations, whether particular titles, categories, programming techniques, anything you might have as an idea to help that person introduce manga, do more with manga without themselves having to become a manga fan?
Okay. I have a good friend, Eva Volan. She's a librarian in Alameda Free Public Library, and she's been a long time proponent of graphic novels and manga in libraries for a while. And so some of the things she's done, and Robin Brenner, who also does No Flying No Tights, has done this as well. They have they start a manga or anime club in their library, and they screen an anime a week or a couple episodes, and then they have the books out, and they encourage people to enjoy it and talk about it. And like sometimes they'll talk about the difference between what they're seeing in the anime and what they're seeing in the manga. Sometimes what's really nice too is that you can say, hey, the anime ended here, but actually the story continues. So why don't you read the rest? There's also I've been invited, I draw comics myself. So Eva has invited me for free comic book day to teach kids how to draw. So sometimes you can reach out to local artists in your community who draw comics, and free comic book day is a great resource too. There's also a free Halloween comics day that has a lot of the manga publishers will offer manga for you to give out for free to your kids as introduction. Sometimes if you ask the publishers, they have sampler books that they give away at cons, and they may have extras to give to you as well. If you ask most publishers, they say, hey, we're going to have we have a manga anime club. They will send you a bag of swag to give out, and have a book club. I would say if you're not really interested in learning much about manga, I would say enlist one of your super readers, enlist one of your super borrowers, and say, hey, what do you read? What's interesting for you, and why? And they'll tell you. And of course, use that as your short list, and you should do your due diligence and read through it, or follow up on look it up on Good Comics for Kids on School Library Journal. Look up the reviews on trusted library sources to see, is this a good pick for my patrons, right? The age group of students I'm serving. I was in a bookstore in LA the other day, and woman came up to me and said, "So do you know the animes?" And I said, "I kind of know the animes." And she said, "My kids tell me a lot about this." And she's holding up Demon Slayer, okay? And I said, "Ah, okay. How old are your kids?" And we had a lovely conversation where I basically said, Demon Slayer is super duper popular. Demon Slayer is excellent. In fact, I love it. I read it. It's one of those manga that I could read several times, and buy the box set. It's a great story. The lead character is super honorable and loyal and has all these characters that you want kids to emulate. He's a really sweet, kind, principled, brave character. However, Demon Slayer has a lot of beheadings. Not saying the demons don't deserve it, but there's a lot of beheadings. And so as long as you know that, and and you could say, well, Grimm's fairy tales, the wolf gets eaten too, like some of these fairy tales are really gory too. Just go in with your eyes open and be healthily skeptical when your kids say, this is the hottest thing out there.
Yes.
Yep. You cannot say if your book gets you get a book challenge, you can't blame the kid who recommended it to you. It's still your job to, even if you don't want to be into manga, you still have to do that level of due diligence to make sure it belongs in your collection.
Ask any of your younger employees, they might know. Ask your friends, kids. The information is out there. You don't have to get into manga. I promise you don't.
Yeah.
I'm not here to say, obviously this is all I read, but I'm not here to say you have to do that. But I will say that if you're open and willing to discover it, there may be a manga that might.
That's what I was getting ready to say.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting ready to say. I was like, this notion of I don't want to get into manga. I'm like, where are we starting with that principle? It's like, try it. The question might be, have you tried a manga that may appeal to you?
It's hard though.
It is. There's a ton of choice.
Not all manga is beginner friendly.
100%.
So sometimes I'll tell people, I play manga sommelier, like the guy who recommends wine to go along with your fish dish, right? Like not all wine's gonna go with your, Trope Meunier, you need a nice Chardonnay with a little buttery notes in it, right? So I will say it's like, oh, if you like jazz, Blue Giant's amazing. Blue Giant is a manga about a guy getting into playing the saxophone and learning to appreciate jazz. Oishinbo is about Japanese cooking. Drops of God, it makes you appreciate wine. Vinland Saga is about Vikings. So I think one thing why I fell in love with manga is manga can be about almost everything.
It's right.
And I learned tons of stuff from it, like even a manga like My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness.
Yes.
Which is a really, the artwork looks really rough. But this is a super personal story, autobiographical story of a woman dealing with her depression, her she's an alcoholic, so she deals with some substance abuse, and her sexuality. And because she's so raw and honest, I've had people come up to me and say, oh man, I felt that, or oh wow, like she gave me courage. And so I interviewed her once, and she's a super shy, super quiet woman. And when I talk to her about it, she is absolutely compelled to draw. She can be having pancreatitis and be double over in pain, and she is drawing. Yeah. So there is amazing creators and stories out there in manga, and I think one thing people maybe they think all manga has to be Naruto, right, or all shonen manga. But there's beautiful romances, there's wonderful autobiographies, there's and even I'll put a plug in for Manga Classics, which is Udon's manga line. Mm-hmm. They do very faithful manga adaptations of Shakespeare, of Les Miserables, of Jungle Book, that you can have, people who are reluctant readers, you can give them those books, and it is true to the original literary source. And it teaches them visual literacy and teaches them about the story. So treat manga as a tool to get reluctant readers in the door, just as any graphic novel.
Yeah.
I think there's more entry points than you'd expect. And you can always hit me up on Twitter because if I don't know the answer, I'll point you to someone who does.
This is true. Deb is everyone knows Deb. She's fantastic. She knows what she's talking about, guys.
So let's this is I guess the good and bad of virtual events. If we were doing this live in person, they would have shut the lights off on us. They could have kicked us out of the room.
Yeah.
As it is, I'm going to probably get in trouble with LibraryCon for letting it go this long. But no, this was great. I'd like to go on for another half hour if we could. But I do think that is a good point to end on, because what I've found in our interactions is that I don't want to get into manga very often is purely from the perspective of you think manga is just shonen.
Right.
And you don't realize. So saying you don't want to get into manga is like saying I don't want to get into movies. I don't want to get into music. You're dismissing an entire medium, not a particular genre. And that is sometimes eye-opening for some people, recognizing that manga is a medium, not a genre. It's one of the starting points we have in our 101 that we've created for the librarians we work with. So, but let's wrap it up here. I want to thank all three of you for taking this time and sharing your insights in this great conversation. I really do wish it could go on. Maybe we'll do it again next year and have a follow-up to this. But Mangasplaining.com to learn more about that and Deb's work there. Frederick Jones, Saturday AM. They are part of the Comics Plus collection. Plus, if you're on social media at all, they're everywhere right now. They're getting a lot of attention. And Kae Winters and TOKYOPOP, one of our original partners on the Comics Plus platform. The Lovex Love line that she mentioned is particularly popular with us, but the Disney titles for younger readers, absolutely great entry points. So if you have Comics Plus, a lot of the comics we've talked about on today's conversation are there and available to you. But just explore, hit the manga category and poke around and look for things that just might catch your eye. And you may surprise yourself that, like me, that 2 years ago, I had 2 manga on my shelf. And now I'm like about to reorganize my shelves because I'm running out of room on my one dedicated manga shelf. So thanks again. You can learn more about these publishers at their websites. You can look up Saturday AM, TOKYOPOP. At the LibraryCon booth, we'll have information that you can download and check out as well. Thank you for attending and have a great night. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.